everybody. Welcome to Movie Astrology. First time those words have come out of my mouth in that order. I'm John Berk from BerkReviews.com, and with me from across the pond is Matt Hudson from whatIwatchedtonight.co.uk. Matt, how you doing, sir?
I'm good. I really expect you to say welcome to the bloody awesome movie podcast. It was on the tip of your tongue, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was harder saying your website for some reason. I've said that a million times now, I think, and
Quite long.
I don't think I've ever stumbled over it like I just did. Partly because my brain was like, "Did you say astrology?" But yeah,
You did
folks.
seem quite happy when you said it. Yeah.
Yeah, we are back, and we're still in 1966. This is episode 2 for 1966. If you listen to our last episode, we kind of outlined the new structure of how we're doing this podcast now to make it monthly instead of arbitrarily, and we're able to really break these movies down a little more and not feel like we have to like spit everything out as fast as possible. Ooh. This is the first episode where we're getting into the top 10 movies of 1966. And if you listen to the last episode, you know we're going to be covering 2 movies an episode. This one's going to be movie number 10 and number 9. We're going to, in this case, I've watched all of the top 10 except for one. But going forward, we're going to peel that back a little bit so we don't have to do quite as much homework each. But most likely, knowing us, we'll probably end up doing more than we have to.
We will, of course.
There's some movies that I regret having already watched that might be on this list, maybe not. But
from a year ago as well.
Yeah.
Today,
Let's not forget. We're talking Alfie and The Professionals. But that's kind of the gist of it. But I guess before we get started, Matt, you have any thoughts? Anything we want to reiterate about 1966 or these, this change, this process, or just how you doing? However you want to jump into this.
Well, I tell you right now, I'm doing well. As usual, I've got a cup of tea, JB. It's the standard drink of an Englishman, so I'm always going to come prepared for that. But no, I'm digging the new format. We've done one episode already. Go check out the 1966 intro episode. It's on Spotify. It's also here on YouTube as well. But no, I'm looking forward to doing this because I've spoken to a few people who have listened to the previous episodes of Astrology, the audio-only ones. Really enjoyed them, so thanks for that. But there are times, certainly during the notable releases and also the top 10, where they wanted us to dive in a little bit more to certain films on those lists. And this now affords us the chance to do that. And it means we get to see films that maybe we haven't seen or maybe we wouldn't want to see otherwise. There are instances of that, maybe on this particular top 10 as well. But no, I'm looking forward to diving into these films going across the next few months of 66 and beyond. And I guess it's probably bears saying now that if all of these films we're going to be talking about in spoiler terms. For this case, it's 1966. It's 50-something years old, 57 years old, if my maths is good there and then. They've been out a long time. We're going to go spoilers. It's just the way it is. So if you haven't seen these films, you haven't seen Alfie or The Professionals, do go and watch them and then come back and listen because we're going to dive into them. But I'm looking forward to this, JB. I think this new format is going to work pretty well.
Yeah, I agree. I like with BAMP, we try the movies we're talking about are brand new, and we don't want to ruin the opportunity. And some people maybe hadn't even had a chance to see them yet. And so we do the spoiler mini-sode, but sometimes it does feel like in the middle of the conversation, you want to just be able to say the thing and not have to like wait and then remember to later bring it up. And I do like that, this kind of freedom, although I'm really wishing Alfie was a more recent watch for me, but luckily that's the one you have to talk about the most. So my thoughts on it will be kept a little bit more brief because it's been a minute since I watched it. I'm sitting here going, I remember not clicking with it more so than anything else, but
I'll do my best to jog your memory.
Yeah, and you might. That's the thing. I really this year in particular, I think there's some really great stuff here. Movies that again I had not really heard of, that I'm really glad that I have watched. And so I'm excited. Again, I've been waiting to jump into this year for some time, so it's exciting to finally actually be doing it. I'm actually stupid excited for the next year on the schedule, which I don't think we've revealed, but we have that one. So much to discuss. So
yeah, but good luck with the new format on that one, but we'll try.
I think it'll work. We might, again, people might say you might have to do more episodes than just the planned 6, but we should probably just hop into this. Let's you get to start us off because you're doing evens for 1966. So
Yes.
your number 10 is Alfie. What's the stats, man?
Alfie, so distributed by Paramount Pictures, directed by Lewis Gilbert, who directed 3 Bond films, I think,
Oh,
including Moonraker, one of the ones that John was a huge fan of, alongside things like
I've
Sink
actually
the
seen all of
Bismarck.
those.
You have not. You only
I,
live twice. The Spy Who Loved Me. Let me get that one right. And Moonraker are the ones that he did.
yeah, which
So
are all the Roger Moores.
yes,
So I've watched all the Craigs, all the Moores, and all the Brosnans at this point.
just got to
I'm
watch all the
now
Connerys now.
I'm torn, dude. Like I don't know the cheapest route to do it. Like I'm like I already own
They're
all
not
of
on
the
Amazon now.
Brosnans. They're not. And that's I had to buy the Brosnan. I had to buy. I had bought the Brosnan DVD box set
Ugh.
from Walmart a while ago, but it only
It was
had
missing
three.
something.
Yeah, I had to order Tomorrow Never Dies separate later. But then I just bought when I was watching the more. I bought I had to buy 2 Blu-ray sets that came with all of the movies. All the more upsetting that Brosnan was missing one because the 2 more sets had all of them. And it would have now that I'm like doing this, I should have just bought like they have the Blu-ray box set with all of the movies. I think up to Spectre. I don't think they've re-released it with No Time to Die, which I already have anyways. But I own all of the Craigs, I own all the Brosnans, and I own all the Moores. So like I'm like, dude, it's cheaper to buy all of them a second time than buying the 2. Like it's like $10 more, I
That's
think.
wild.
And I'll get the Connerys and I'll get the Daltons, which there's only like 2 Daltons, right? But I
There's
still
like 2 Daltons, 1 Lazenby. That
I don't
probably be
think
quite cheap.
Lazenby's included in the main thing though. I feel like I might be wrong, but I feel like his was like an offshoot. And I don't know
No,
if the
his was
Connery.
definitely one. His was
Okay, so
definitely
maybe it's
one.
in there. And I don't know.
That's it.
Connery came back in the '80s, right? Like and did a
He
one
did
off, but
like Never Say Die Again or something like that. Never Say Never Again. I don't know what it's called, but he did his was like a non-canon and I'm sure it was like Peter Sellers
yeah.
or someone was Bond before or something like that in a
Ooh,
non-canon
there was
version.
the other Casino Royale is I think
Yes.
is the
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
but
I hope he didn't pay too much for Tomorrow Never Dies.
no, not too much. It was like four
Yeah.
four or $5. More than it's. I doubt I'll ever watch it again. But
That's the problem. But I know that the Amazon bought the rights to
they
James
did.
Bond. I know that, so I'm surprised they're not on Prime yet, unless
They
I'm missing
they
something.
they were for a minute, and they seem to have pulled them off. And I don't know if they're like gonna maybe they're remastering them or they're about to release a new box
I
set or who
guess.
knows. And we are
Either way,
on the cusp of a new Bond again, so we're gonna have
apparently so. Apparently,
yeah. I mean the Broccolis are going to milk that until
they're,
it's dry. Yeah,
they're
yeah,
going to milk that cow till it's dry. But either
it's
way,
at
JB
least
Lewis Gilbert did 3 of them.
yeah. Sorry, this is not a Bond podcast, but I'm
No, we
currently
could. This
much
is what
more.
happens, guys. We could easily just go off on tangents, and we usually do.
The thing is, if you go back through the past episodes of astrology, the Bond movies were a regular staple of the top 10.
Yes, they really
And
were.
I had seen none of them except for the Craig ones when we started doing this. And now I have seen all of these. I still have, again, all the Connerys to go and the Daltons and the Lazenby. Seen all the Austin Powers movies. But
It's probably
um,
better.
I really like the Powers movies. But yeah, so it's exciting for me to now see them in this astrology and be like, oh, I
I've
know these for
actually
a
seen
change.
those now. Without
I'm
me
not
trying to
just
like
speaking.
half-heartedly tell you what they're about, which is not always the best. Was and it's about a spy, women like him, and he goes to space and stuff, and black exploitation and all that. That
And bad puns.
bad puns. Yeah, it's tough to try and describe sometimes. But yeah, Lewis Gilbert, who directed Alpha, he did 3 of those films, and he said, and since doing those, he then went on to do smaller films again, like Alfie, and also Alfie has an Austin Powers reference. Or actually, vice versa, Austin Powers is relevant to Alfie. I'll mention that later on, but. So it stars, of course, Michael Caine, who received his first ever Oscar nomination for this film for Best Actor. And it also stars Millicent Martin, Julia Foster, Jane Asher, Shirley Anfield, Vivian Merchant, Eleanor Bron, and Shelley Winters. My friend, this had a budget of $800,000. And to make it number 10 in 1966, it grossed $18 million. $18.871 million. That is a big return. A lot of that was because the studio Paramount, they they bought the rights to this film because it was cheap. Basically, it was a small British film. They wanted to put their money into British filmmaking because it was cheaper for them. They didn't have to hire big stars, and kind of like the Blumhouse model, you put a little in, you might get a little back. Here, it took off in America, which was the big thing. It took off in the States, which was a real concern for Paramount. They didn't think this film was going to take off because Michael Caine is speaking in his native Cockney accent. There's lots of
Mhm.
slang, which I got, but I don't know how well it translates internationally. But apparently, at the time, very, very well to make $18.871 million. And these numbers are from thenumbers.com. They are the only ones who had reliable domestic stats for 1966. Depending on the year, it'll either be domestic or it'll be worldwide. Obviously, the further in the future we go, it will be worldwide stats, but for now, it's domestic. Rotten Tomatoes critic score is 96% for Alfie, and Metacritic is 70. As we mentioned, Michael Caine got a Best Actor nomination. It didn't get any Oscar wins though, but it certainly did get a few nominations alongside Caine's actor. It was nominated for Best Picture, for Best Supporting Actress for Vivian Merchant, Best Screenplay for a screenplay based on material from another medium, and Best Original Song for Alfie. These older years, they've got some of the longest nomination names going
Oh
out
yeah,
there,
it's
and I'm
wild.
reading it like, I still haven't finished. Keep going. So this film was really, really, really well received when it came out. It's very much of its time. I have a review here from the Hollywood Reporter by a dude called James Powers. This was from 1966, and this is an American journalist saying Lewis Gilbert's production for Paramount is an amusing, moving, and meaningful picture. Although for much of the way it tinkles along with the innocent merriment of a carousel, it dips into reality for its climax and makes a valid and indelible impression. It will be a big box office success, one of the year's leaders. Gilbert directed as well as produced, and he's handled the mercurial and prickly elements with a sure and certain hand. So pretty effusive praise there from the Hollywood Reporter back in 1966. Me, having seen this, we've both seen this. My top level thoughts before I throw it to you for yours, JB. I think having watched this again, I have watched it again for the purpose of this episode. When I first watched it last year, I was kind of thrown off by just how authentic it felt. It didn't. There was no punches thrown in the characterization of Alfie. Alfie is not a hero. Alfie is a Cockney Casanova. He is not a good person. And I was thrown off by that because Michael Caine does that so well. Michael Caine's probably a good person. Alfie Cartwright is not. But I rewatched it again and it worked for me. It resonated with me. And not to say that I was thinking, oh, Alfie, what a guy. Oh, no, he's despicable. He really is. But once that initial shock of this awful person had worn off, I'm watching it now with different eyes, and I think, yeah, this is a really, really solid movie. Really well directed. I do think the acting is very good. I think Michael Caine is excellent, and I think some of the supporting cast are very good as well. But despite his attempts and realizations at the end of the film, this ain't a Christmas Carol. This isn't that kind of film where at the end the bad guy repents and meets the ghosts and goes and feeds Tiny Tim. It's not that kind of film. But upon rewatch, the the quite deliberate attempt to make Alfie a bad person. This is Alfie is the devil in a suit, and they know that, and that is the point of the film. When I first watched it, I was kind of thinking, "Oh man, am I missing something here? Is this meant to be sort of posited as just a this is the film, or is this a satire? Is this telling us something, or are we just getting the story of a really bad person?" And it turns out there is a lot more going on beneath the surface. But when you first saw this in JB, as you mentioned earlier on, it didn't quite click. I know it's been a while now, but what are your thoughts on it? And also, because it is such a quintessentially swinging '60s, swinging London film, how did you view it from that side as well?
Well, it definitely reminded me of Austin Powers. You kind of alluded to that a minute ago, but not in the fun way, right? Like Austin Powers, he's like
No.
swinging, and it's all like upbeat and happy. Although the character is depicted as having some depression at times throughout the comedic elements, right? Like he's not. A lot of it is like a front and a facade that he puts on, which I think is also kind of playing on the bond of it all, right? But watching this, especially because Michael Caine plays Austin's dad in the
That's it.
third movie in Goldmember. and that character feels very much inspired by Alfie. So I caught a lot of those references, and that was where my brain was. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd, so it's not like I hated it. It just it wasn't exactly what I was expecting, because he is like despicable. You don't like him, and I usually like Michael Caine. I'm especially like Christopher
Go
Nolan
for
seems
it.
to really like Michael Caine, right? Like he's usually the character in the movies that
Yes.
you kind of like. I like this guy. He's a
Ebenezer
great.
Scrooge, man.
Yeah, I mean, Alfie is Alfred in the Batman movies, right? And yes, the best Scrooge, right? Michael Caine is hands down the best Scrooge. If you haven't seen the Muppets Christmas Carol, do yourself a favor this
Hands
holiday.
down.
It's on Disney Plus, even like it's not hard to see
Yeah,
anymore. It used to be
I
a little
love
hard
that
to
film.
get, but yeah, it's literally my favorite Christmas Carol, um and it's because of him. And that's so I went into this with a lot of like love of Michael Caine, and was surprised. I don't want to watch the Jude Law version of this, but I also want to watch the Jude Law version of this to see, do they update it for like the modern time, or is it set in the 60s? Because a lot of the behavior here would not fly if this movie were made right
100%. Yeah.
now. Like, um, and yet a lot of this still is very much something that is around. It's just not. It's not treated with like I don't feel like the movie's saying this is aspirational, but Alfie definitely thinks like, hey, look at my life. This is the way to be. And he doesn't by the end, but he also doesn't like he doesn't really learn anything necessarily. He's just like he's unhappy, but he doesn't maybe know why he's unhappy or what it is that he's missing from his life in order to go to that next phase or find that joy that we're all hunting for, right? Like I don't feel like this film offers that, or that Alfie gets an easy way out, which is why I think it is well regarded, or at least was at the time, because it isn't like a forgiving thing. It's just one of those things where like watching it with 2023 eyes, and admittedly progressive eyes that try to, I've raised a young girl who is now an adult woman, and I've constantly in fear of her being running into some horrible person like this, and like, did I do a good enough job where she would know not to fall for this kind of thing? And so far so good, but it's that fatherly fear that I don't think
Yes.
stuff like movies like this, I just can't. I'm always like, oh, this guy is the worst. And I think that's more why I can't remember having any criticism about like the filmmaking or the production. Michael Caine addressing the camera is a cool stylistic choice that I think works well.
Revolutionary
Um,
at the time as well, really.
yeah, and that's something that we see movies do that now. Sometimes it doesn't work, and then sometimes you're just like, wow, this is incredible. Like Amelie is one that like she doesn't directly
Oh,
address the camera, but she definitely breaks that fourth wall in ways that are just so great. And I mean,
charming.
it's funny how like I watched Austin Powers as a kid in like high school, and
Mm.
what I never thought of Austin as someone I was aspiring to be, which I don't think that movie's wanting you to do that. He's kind of a joke. Everyone kind of thinks he's a joke. He manages to succeed anyways, but it seems like mostly even the people who are supposed to respect him don't take him as seriously as you would think. And then the first one, especially Elizabeth Hurley's character, is so uh, of the era because she's modern day, and she's looking at his lifestyle like, oh, you can't be like this, you can't just sleep around with everybody. And so like it's literally opposing what this movie is presenting, right? And I hate making those two comparisons. I know they are very different movies. I just that swinging 60s idea, especially tied to the British side of it, for me was
Yeah.
introduced through Austin Powers. Why, like when I watched Blow Up, which is
Blow up.
also from this year. These two movies, I think, I'm sorry, Blow Up and Alfie, I think have a lot more in common than you would think. Not in terms of like genre, but in terms of like the swinging 60s, because that guy, there's all of the photography scenes in Austin Powers, I feel come from Blow Up, and then a
Mhm.
lot of the personality traits I think come from Alfie. And so it's like you have these two films encapsulate what it must have been like, or these at least one element, one thread of the 60s, free love and all of that. The darker sides of it, because both I think are heavily in the dark tones of that world. And I think I went into Alfie expecting a comedy. I don't think I was expecting this. I don't know why. I don't know why I thought comedy. Maybe I was confusing it with like Arthur or what's the Dudley Moore? Is it Arthur? Is Dudley Moore Arthur?
Yes, Arthur. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think Russell Brand. Oh, that guy
Yeah.
did a more recent version. Yeah.
No, another,
Yeah.
but because that's stupid comedy, and then Martin Short had a character that's starts with an A or something, right? Like I feel like there's a series of comedic movies with A based characters,
Hey.
Alvin and the Chipmunks. You know, who knows? But I guess in my head, I went into this thinking Michael Caine, like him, it's got to be a comedy because it's Alfie. It's got to be a
Yep.
comedy.
Yep.
I have no
It
idea
just
why.
sounds kind of skippy and light-hearted.
Right?
Alfie. Yeah. And the
And
pit and
it's
the photo is through the one of the posters as Michael Caine's head, like face, as the dot above the eye, and it looks quite
yeah.
happy-go-lucky.
It doesn't look like your life will be shattered by the end of the film, Alfie. Get ready. Like
Oh wow.
everything you thought you valued, well, guess what? And
You
yeah,
don't.
you have
Yeah.
so many women. Get ready to have zero women. You're about to be on your own. Yeah, wild stuff.
Yeah, I can't knock any of that. It's a tough watch, but I think it's having watched it again. It's deliberate. It's meant to be. It's showing you that this is Alfie's life, and at the end, look what has become of him. And Alfie himself even says, he said, what's it all about?" He even kind of questions like, "What have I got? I've got a few bob. I've done this and that, but haven't really got anything to show for it." I think it's just the kind of way that Alfie's so unrepentant, even in his lowest moment when he's in tears and he's realised the savagery of what he's forced one of his partners to have to go through, which we'll get to. Even then, when he's crying, he's like, "No, I'm crying for myself, not for anybody else, not because of anything." So unrepentant, and even at the end, even though he adopts that stray dog, or he seems to, you still don't think that he's ever really going to change. And I'm pretty sure Lewis Gilbert said in a column he did once that he envisaged Alfie, being 50, 60 years old, still being the same guy because he just can't break out of the mold. And obviously, the older he gets, the kind of the less fortunate he becomes with it. And that's just the story of Alfie. And I think this film actually sets that up really well. Alfie's just this modern age Casanova, conquering any woman that he comes across until he falls in love with one who plays him at his own game and breaks his heart. And it shows that the tides of that era were changing. We mentioned it on the last episode that as the 60s went on, the more progressive they came, the more boundaries, certainly in art and culture, were blown away. And Alfie is actually a film which it touches on a lot of taboo subjects, which you wouldn't have got in the decade before, or even I argue half a decade before as well. We're talking
Yeah,
the swing in London, the swing in '60s, the youth, the socio-cultural revolution was beginning. The scene was changing, and British films of the era were becoming more reflective of that, of the working class, of the everyday people and the struggles that they faced. And rewatching, I saw that more and more, especially in how Alfie is finally getting his comeuppance. It's encapsulated in the fact that the times are changing, not just here, but also in the United States as well. At the end, he meets Rita, and the two get on. The two do what they do when you're young and in love. And Alfie's decided, yep, I want to settle down with Rita. I want to marry her. I've seen all these other women I've been with, and they've moved on. It's my time now. Turns out Rita is sleeping with somebody else, doing to Alfie what he's done to so many other people. When he says, what's this all about? She says, oh, he's younger than you are. He's younger than you are. Sling your hook, basically. Off you go. And for me, I was like, yeah, I get it now. The times are changing. Women are having a voice. This film has told you that women just didn't have a voice, but they do. And in the United States, you had the women's revolution in the 60s. Hadn't quite made it over to the UK at this point, but it was getting there. But Rita was American, but Rita was rich. She was more of an upper class type. She had choices. The women that Alfie was preying on, they were lower class. They were from poor backgrounds. They didn't have the choices. They couldn't break free like Rita did. So when he was up against somebody like that, he crumbled. And I love the way that the film actually shows that he basically is just a flat track bully. He just bullies women because they're vulnerable, because they're weak, and because he can do. Whereas at the end, it shows that no, that's it isn't going to always work like that. And even if he isn't repentant himself, well, everybody he's ever been with has moved on and has gone on to better things. But the film absolutely belongs to Michael Caine, and his turn as Alfie really is a superb turn, because he'd been in Zulu before when he had to put on a very posh voice, whereas now this is his first leading role, and he was just able to just go with it. His East End Cockney voice came out, and he is able to make us hate him, and I don't and he somehow makes us fall for his charms at the same time. Not to say that his behaviour overall is charming or applaudable, because it isn't, but it's the kind of raw authenticity of his performance, the overall performance, the dialogue as well, and the film itself is so captivating. He can he can depict like real cruelty, yearning, charm, vulnerability, and be so nonplussed at the same time. Plus, the fourth wall breaking, like you mentioned, it's
Yeah.
it's probably very tough to do that, and the way he does it so effortlessly, and the way that's blended in by Gilbert and the other performers, it's really well done. And I don't often like films where we have a narrator, but I think again it works really well here because of the honesty. There's no pretense to Alfie; he's just honest. And while some of the things he said are shocking, and some are played for laughs, you're getting the real deal, and that's what I liked about that. And I think you mentioned earlier on as well that the film itself isn't trying to make Alfie a hero, and it really isn't. That is crucial to me. On first watch, I was
Yeah.
trying to thinking, are they trying to make not actively trying to say this is peak male structure here, but I was like, are they really? But then when I watched, I was like, yeah, they're not celebrating the hedonism here. They're not doing that, and it's not trying to worship Alfie. You know, he treats women terribly. You know, which again, the domination of men over women in this era. They needed a man as much as the film says has the female character saying, you know, we don't need a man, Alfie. It then obviously goes out their way to show that they do. But some of the things that Alfie does are awful in this film. Obviously, sleeping around is one thing, but at one point he's contracted for tuberculosis, and he has to go to a facility to get treated, and he meets a guy called Humphrey, and he's telling, you know, they kind of he grudgingly befriends him, and he's saying to Humphrey, look, you know, don't trust your wife. You know, you don't know what you. I paraphrase, but he basically says you don't trust women because you don't know who they've been with or where they've been. And he's trying to talk this happily married man into basically saying, you know, your wife, you don't want to be tied down to just one woman because you don't know anything about her. He's happily married. So what does Alfie do? He originally says, "Oh, she's not my type. You know, I don't like the look of her." What does he do? Takes her on a boat ride. He seduces her, and he sleeps with Humphrey's wife, who has never been with anybody else. She's called Gilda. She's played by Vivian Murphy. He gets her pregnant. 3 months later, she comes to him. What am I going to do? And he does. He's already had a kid with Gilda before in the film. Sorry, not Gilda. Gilda is the lady he met before, first. He had a kid with her called Malcolm. It's
Yeah.
Lily. Sorry, it's Humphrey's wife, and Harry's wife. Sorry. And yeah, she said, "What are we going to do?" He doesn't want another kid, so he gets this kind of backwater doctor to perform an abortion in his house, makes her pay for it, and then leaves when it's being done because he says, "You know, I'm here for the pleasure, not the pain." And and this is when the film suddenly, if it was trying to be a comedy or kind of hop, step, and a jump type film beforehand with cheeky, chappy, naughty boy Alfie, this is when it takes a real turn because we're dealing with something which was very taboo then. Abortion was illegal until 1967 in the UK. The laws were passed to make it more accessible or illegal or legal, shall we say? But it was illegal, and the film goes out of its way to say if you get caught, you will go to prison for this because it's child murder. Um, and then yeah, the aftermath of that is the fetus. You don't see it, but the fetus is on the table. Alfie sees it. He has a breakdown and realizes what have I done? He's just seen Gilda, his ex partner, christening her son, and he comes back to this grimy flat where his friend, essentially his wife, is laying on his chair, having just had an abortion by herself. It is a tough watch, and at this point, Alfie does start to take a few steps back and realize everything he's done and how he has hurt people. He says he doesn't want to throughout. He don't want to hurt other people, but he does.
Yeah.
And we see him pay for the put money in Lily's pocket purse, pay her back secretly because he hasn't got the. He's too honourable to tell her I'm going to pay for it. He has to sneak it in. He also says at the beginning of the film, I don't need a woman to respect me. That's not what I want a woman for. But it's a really really tough part of the film that is. And before that, there are other parts. There's things he says. He refers to women as it. It doesn't know what she wants. It doesn't know what it wants. I picked it up earlier on. Alfie is a deplorable person. But Michael Caine plays him off with at times this kind of bluster where you almost almost comes across as a cheeky chappy when he's in between seducing people. But in terms of the film, there is no in between in terms of how women and men are. Women are subservient to the man in this film, which is Alfie, because that's how he sees them. And I think that's really well done to me, and it just made me think that Alfie, what did he want? Because remember what you said, like what does he? He doesn't get anything. I think he just wants, to have something. I think he wants to feel some kind of significance. So the only times he really feels confident, we see him really confident, is when he's driving his Rolls Royce, when he's a chauffeur, or when he meets Rita, the rich and American lady, and he thinks, well, maybe I've made a step up now. It's all material stuff to him until he realizes that that's not going to be enough to see him through. A great final scene on Tower Bridge as well, when he sees some of the characters, some of the women he's wronged, and they ignore him. They got no time for him anymore. They just ignore him, and he plumbs the depth of morality and ethical behaviour before trying to mend his own ways. But he gets sat down on his backside during it, and I like that the film did that, even if it
Yeah.
isn't quite maybe the kind of the you got what you deserve type thing. At the end of the day, he ends up lonely. Everybody he wronged mainly is now in a better place, other than maybe Lily, who has had an abortion. He has to live with that now, and her husband Harry, who is now, he could be dying, and his mate from the facility, Alfie, seduced his wife, and he's got kids as well. It's even saying it, it's like, damn, this is reprehensible. This is just awful behaviour. But so characterization's great. I think the music's really good. There's a really jazzy score throughout. I like this. The main song Alfie was changed to Austin in Austin Powers, and they just every time the word Alfie was said, they changed it to Austin, which is very cool. But I think it's shot really well. I actually think the thematically it's really well done with what it's trying to say, with the movement, everything that's happening in the time, the movement, the London movement, the British swing in '60s, what's happening in the States as well. Even though they didn't think the film was going to do well in the States, they were going to overdub it. But Lewis Gilbert said, no, the Cockney aspect of this film is what makes the film. And Jude Law's version is okay, and it is more of an updated film. But this is, I don't want to say that version's like the angel, but this is the devil. Michael Caine's version is
Mm.
the devil incarnate in a suit. On the flip side, Jude Law's he is more of a cheeky charmer. Women flock to him more, and it's clear it's not anywhere near as abrasive or as upsetting as that one, because this film could not be made now. We'll say that about quite a few, I think, JB. This
Yeah.
film couldn't be made now because you don't need it. We've had so many films which have shown the evolution since then, and they've done it so well. But I will say that this film does what it sets out to do really well as well. It shows that at this time, this was the attitudes and behaviours of some people.
Yeah.
Maybe it still is now. We know it is, but it's really effective. There is more going on beneath the surface there, JB. The rewatch did help. The rewatch did
And
help.
I do think it's important to note, like the cultural context role of film as art, right? Like it's
100%,
not,
yeah.
movies aren't necessarily made to be seen in a later sense with the same eyes, but it's a great way of looking back at
Yeah.
what was the perspective of the time, what was the prevailing attitude, what was the world like. And that's one of the beauties of film as a time capsule. It captures that moment, especially if it is of a moment. I mean, when we do a period piece now, we're trying to be, what was it like then? But when you're doing a this is how it is movie, you capture that moment on film in an attitude, in an era. And yeah, when we look back at it now, we're like, oh, we were sorely misguided. And
Yeah.
that's a great tool if you're looking at it with that eyes. Now, of course, it can be used as a tool that's misinterpreted, and we might think, oh, this is who we should aspire to be, and then that's a problem. But
I'm sure some
You
people
know,
have watched this and thought that, and
I mean, there are definitely people who still have this attitude, right? About like
yeah,
the whole his argument with the married man. I hear that sentiment from people frequently. You know, there are people who clearly don't value um, like that faithfulness, right? Like they don't mind cheating, whether it's marriage or not. I've always been of the mind that if you're unhappy with the person you're with, then leave them so you don't hurt them. You'll hurt them by leaving them, but you'll hurt them worse if you stay with them and then cheat on them
better in
most
the
of the
long
time.
run. Yeah,
And obviously there are people who have come to terms where like both parties are okay with it. Hey, you know, that's your business. um but the deplorable side of this is that he is manipulating people to get what he
yes,
wants with no regard to their feelings and only with his desire to satisfy his own urges. And he is left with nothing as a result, so that it is a cautionary tale in that regard. And
100%.
again, just like there are people in the 60s who would argue that, you know, this lifestyle is fine if you're not malicious, if you're not hurting people, if everyone is out in the open about being promiscuous and sleeping around. And this could be a filmmaker or a writer who disagrees with that sentiment and thus writes the character to be deplorable. I mean, they're all variables that we should always take into consideration. There's not No movie is a encapsulation of all of the right answers, right? Like it's just a
Yeah, no,
perspective on a topic. But like you and I both had a similar kind of reaction because we are not like this guy, and we're like, oh, generally speaking, when I watch a movie, I want to connect to the protagonist, and I don't know if I could have disconnected faster than like this. You know, I'm just like, nope, not this guy. I don't want to be this guy. I'm not this guy. I don't know if I want to sit with this guy for 90 minutes. And because like there are obviously anti-hero movies. I wouldn't necessarily say Alfie's an anti-hero because I don't think he's much of a hero. But
no,
but like you have like Walter White and Deadpool and you know,
yeah, yeah,
some people might even say Patrick Bateman. And some people watch those
yeah.
and they do aspire in the wrong direction, I think. And yet, like, you can watch like Walter White, and like, I don't agree with what he does, but I totally understand why he felt he had no other choice. Like, I can, he
Mhm.
was in a terrible position over and over again, and it's his own ego that won't let him see the better paths. Where I don't see that with Alfie either. Like, I don't look at Alfie and be like, well, clearly it's just because he's horny. It's like,
Yeah,
no, he doesn't need to
this,
have,
yeah.
yeah, like he doesn't have to be with
He wants
every
his to
single
be able
one
to
of
have
these
his
people.
cake and eat it. That's what he wants. He does it.
Yeah,
That's it.
and so there is
It's
no like
yeah,
relatability. I can't empathize at all with his character, and especially in the ways that he chooses. I can feel bad for him. Like I don't wish him to be in the situation that he's in, but it's also like, yeah, but you have dug your own grave here,
put
guy. Like
yourself
there's
in there. Yeah,
every, yeah, it's like I can't feel as bad as I might want to in normal situations. I tend to want to be sympathetic to most people's plights. You know, like I don't understand. And again, even with him, I don't want to be so judgmental. But what we're presented with in the film does make it like it's all on you, Alfie. Like you could
yeah,
have chose so many. Like you had girls who cared for you, who could have
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, made you happy had you been able to just be with the one. Um, and you chose to look for other options, and it's like, yeah, it's hard to feel too much you know, sorrow for him. And that's I think kind of what kept the wall up for me. It was just like, mm,
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that. He, in a film where a guy has a kid, and you kind of think maybe he's going to break through when he sees the kid, but at the first chance, he sees a woman and he says, "Oh, this is mine. It's my sister's kid." Yeah, well, no, it's not mine. And then when he sees when he sees said kid being christened by his ex girlfriend and her new partner, you think, is that going to be the one to break through? And he tries to with Rita, but she plays him his own game. He gets his comeuppance. He forces somebody to have an abortion. This film deals in heavy subjects, and it gets heavy,
does.
but I think it's handled with respect. It is handled with respect. There's nothing here which is, I don't think, which is manipulative in terms of what we're being presented with. I think it's just done with a cold hard fact of this is what's happening. This is what it's like. We're not going to sugarcoat this, and I think they do that really very well, JB. So, big influence on British culture. This film, just because of its links to the swinging '60s. Hey, look, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, George Best,
Yeah.
they all went to the premiere of this film. This was a big deal when it came out, and it has had a huge influence on British cinema. So number 10, JB, was a film, that shaped the cinema in this country and gave us one of our greatest and one of the most beloved film stars in Michael Caine.
Yeah, Michael Caine's fantastic, and
Come
I
on.
think the Beatles definitely helped American audiences want to flock to this movie. Why the box
I
office,
think you're
uh,
100% right.
it's right. You know what, 64? I think the
Yeah, yeah.
Beatles did Ed Sullivan, so like that's still there, still
Yes.
prominent. The
The
British
Stones
in
weren't much later, so yeah.
the British invasion, the love of the Britophiles, is that's not the right word. Anglophiles,
Anglophiles.
the
Yeah.
people here in the
Britophile will
states that
do, though.
love. I mean, I do I have a fondness for some Brits, but yeah, I wouldn't put myself in that category. So apologies for not knowing the correct term. But yeah, that's Alfie, folks. Let's
It is.
transition. We're going
What's
back
number
to the
9, JB?
old west.
Ooh.
Well, we mentioned that Alfie's like a encapsulation of the year 1966. The
Mm,
Professionals is not. We're traveling back in time a bit. We're going to the Professionals. This is distributed by Sony Pictures, directed by Richard Brooks, stars Burt Lancaster, Lee Marvin, um, Robert Ryan, Jack Palance, who's in so many great westerns,
yeah.
Woody Strode, Ralph Bellamy, Claudia Cardinal. If I'm not, I'm wondering, yeah, Jack Palance. Unfortunately, I don't know his ethnicity, to be fair, but I don't think he's Mexican, and he's definitely playing a Mexican in this movie.
He's definitely playing
Um,
a Mexican. He says
um,
amigo more than once.
yeah,
Compadre.
his name is Jesus Raza. It would again a modern film he would be Jesus, but it's not a modern film. Um,
Jesus.
uh, exactly. But I don't know if I said Claudia Cardinelli or not, but I just did in case. The budget's not disclosed, but the domestic gross is just over Alfie's 18 million to 19,537,346. A little lower RT at 89%, but a 75 on Metacritic.
Wow.
Um, so a little higher there. So odd how that can work out. No Oscar wins or nominations. I'm sorry, no Oscar wins, but nominated for Best Director, Best Screenplay based on material from another medium. I like Best Adapted Screenplay so much more.
Much
Um,
prefer that.
and Best Cinematography for Color, which I guess that implies this year they had two different cinematography
It's,
categories.
it's correct, yep.
Um, so here's a review from the New York Times by Bosley Crother.
Ding
Um,
it.
the scenery provided for this picture is clearly more profound than the script. Ouch. And the sense of magnitude in the environment more engrossing than that of the plot. Man, take it for noisy adventure accompanied by Maurice Jarre's score. Might be Jarre. And you may throb to Mr. Brooks's The Professionals, but don't expect anything else. I don't fully agree with that sentiment whatsoever. I've now watched this twice, and I
Yep.
have grown in the last 7 years of doing Berk reviews to be a fan of Western, something I did not used to be. And
I'm
I
with you
am
there.
not, I don't like country music. Generally speaking, I mean, there might be a song here and there, and I do like Taylor Swift. I don't consider her a
I knew
country
it
artist, especially not at this point. Um,
anymore.
but I have really grown to love westerns. I have some favorite movies that are western. Shane is probably my strongest western, but I love Good and Bad and Ugly, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which is a little non-traditional western.
Mhm.
And I do like a lot of non-traditional westerns like Logan or you know wouldn't necessarily argue Mad Max. There's a western. Oh, No Country for Old Men, movie that I would consider to be a
Good, yeah.
western. But then again, I love like True Grit and No Hell or High Water. Like it's a genre that I'm like clearly
Mhm.
there are themes and stuff that just resonate with me. The Professionals, I really enjoyed the film. I do think the plot is simple, but it's also not. And again, same spoiler warning we gave earlier applies to the Professionals here, but just we're gonna get into all the details. Um, but I find it, uh, especially on the second watching, because sometimes when I've watched the movie, I'll remember all of the moments, but I don't necessarily remember when they happen. And so
Yeah.
rewatching it, I'm like, I think we still have like 20 minutes left, or we have like an hour left, and it'll be less time between key moments than I remembered, or whatever. So the second viewing, I was like, oh, this is where it gets really interesting. And then it does, but I thought there was a longer gap from one key moment to the end of the film, and there's not. Like once they break her out of her entrapment,
Yeah.
it moves so fast, and I really, really like Burt Lancaster's character a whole lot in this film, Bill Dalworth. Um,
Yep.
I also like Rico. It has a very A Team kind of vibe, which would predate the A Team, but like
Mhm.
to me, like keeping in mind too, I haven't really watched the A Team since I was a kid, but I get the general premise. You got the one guy who's Liam Neeson in the remake, who organizes the plans, and then you have everybody who is a team. I mean, you could argue that for any heist film, but like the A Team, that was generally the idea, and that's the vibe. Like Rico's the leader. And Burt Lancaster is like the cool guy that would be the Bradley Cooper type character, I think, if I'm remembering the dynamics correctly. And
Yes, you're right.
um and so in a way I think this it kind of like, and I think there is a professional TV series as well, and they were going to do a second movie, but that got shut down because they couldn't get all the cast to come back, because of contracts and such, but I really I just find that the film moves really well. It's engaging. I think it dabbles with themes that maybe westerns traditionally wouldn't have done. This is post the traditional western, so we're getting into that new era of westerns where they're starting to explore the kind of hypocrisy of the old western films, that like you have
Yep.
these guys who are working for this rich American, and he's like, you're gonna my wife was kidnapped by a Mexican, go down there, and they're like, well, wait, hold on, we know Jesus. We were with him for years. We were fighting with him. And now they're on the other side of it, and they're torn. And I think that is the dynamic of the plot that I really find so interesting, is that they are working for one guy who they don't have anything in common with other than he's willing
Yeah.
to give them a lot of money, and they all need money, against a guy that they are like, he wouldn't do this. He wouldn't do the thing he's being accused of. That's not his style. And they are completely right. And yet they're also like the
Mm.
almighty dollar, right? Like it dictates they need the money, so they're
Yeah.
going to do the job. And I love how they kind of twist that on the guy, like how they bring it at the end, because even as a plot twist, you're supposed to think Jesus is dead at one point, and because
Yes.
he shot, and then like the reveal is that he kept him alive, even though a lot of people die. Maria Gomez plays Chiquita, and Bill Dalworth, Burt Lancaster's character, has a thing for her, and I that I really wish she could have made it. It really kills me
Yeah.
how she goes down. But and again, there's a lot of like little things like that, because like she's thrown off as being kind of a slut, and like the way they play that feels
Mhm.
a little old timey mind, attitude
And
about
that's
it. Like,
them calling her that as well, isn't it? That's the way they
yes,
portray, yeah, or think of her,
correct.
yeah.
Yeah, that's not my like. That's what I'm saying is kind of problematic with the movie, is that all the guys are implied to sleep around a lot, and they don't. It's no big
And that's
deal, but
okay.
she is the one. Yeah, but she
Yeah.
is like, oh, she never turns anyone out of her
Yeah.
bed, and she's very proud of that. She brags about it even, but like that's again,
Never. That's it.
yeah, like it's not super tasteful. But again, Jack Palance, who is in Shane and Curly's Gold, right? Or the City Slickers, 1 and 2, uh, is playing Jesus Raza, and of course, I mean, very traditional this time period that white actors are cast and put into some shade of brown face. Charlton Heston in the Orson Welles film is not going to come to me now, but he plays the federale in that, and is it's very, very unfortunately common. And again, it's one of those things, we don't want to erase that it happened, but we should always acknowledge that it wasn't okay, and
Yeah.
it happened
100%.
a lot. It happened too much. And
Yeah.
again, in ways that it's, if you're gonna do it, at least like make sure you get the name correct. Like he wouldn't be Jesus, he'd be Jesus. Like, come on, guys, like at least do a little bit of footwork. But I guess I've rambled a little too much, Matt. What did you end up watching The Professionals?
What did you say at the top, JB? We'll probably end up watching it. Of course we will, because we love film. We do too much homework. Of course I watch The Professionals, yeah. And then I probably will do. Even though I'm doing evens this year, there is a high chance I'll still end up watching what you're watching, because
Mhm.
it's a chance for me to watch a film that, again, ordinarily I wouldn't necessarily flock to. And westerns, very similar to you, dude, weren't really my bag. I just saw them as kind of just gruff men who kind of talk like this and mumble an awful lot, just shooting each other on horses and taking down the engines and all that kind of stuff. But having seen a few, and really appreciating the craft that goes into it as well. Sometimes the plots are a bit thin, like this, but it's what kind of orbits that. It's the performances, it's the cinematography. A lot of the time is spectacular, and the
Yeah. Oh
production
man.
design. And I got to push back a little bit on what Bosley Crowther says about the lack of decent dialogue. I think there's some really good moments of dialogue. There's some good back and forwards in this, which I'm sure you've got as well. I think the dialogue is pretty damn good in this for what for a western, without meaning to sound for a western, but you know, maybe I wouldn't expect to come in and get cool like back and forward like we got between Jesus and I think it's Dulworth at one point. Really good talking about love affairs and the revolution. Great quote. But this I really did quite enjoy the professionals. I always go into westerns expecting them to be kind of a boring old slog, especially because some of them can be quite long. But no, I quite
Yeah.
enjoyed this. It felt a bit like the Dirty Dozen to me. It's funny you mentioned the A Team. I got a Dirty Dozen vibe, kind of like the adventurous side of it. I think the four Lancaster, Marvin, Ryan, and Strode. I think they're really well together. I mean, on screen, off screen, I hear they every now and then had a few arguments, but on screen, I think they're really quite good. Is there commentary on the Vietnam War throughout? Yes, very much so. I think there's a huge Vietnam discussion going on here because remember, I mean, Vietnam went
Mm.
on for 20 years, that entire war, so we were halfway through it by the point of this year. No, I liked it. I think there's a lot of action, a lot of guns going off in here. I like I guess you can call it I like the reveal that when they finally find Maria, she hasn't been captured
Oh
at all.
yeah.
I quite enjoy that. And one bit that made me laugh, Jay, which I knew you'd like, is they called a horse. They called it one of God's most stupid animals. I thought you'd
Yeah.
like that. You may need to add
Lancaster.
context.
Listeners, I tend to dislike horse related films, although there have been some. And I still don't like to watch horses suffer, though. Like, let's be clear, because that there is a debate about whether they should let the horses go or kill the horses. I'm like, let them
Yep.
go. I understand their fear, but
And they
I'm
did.
like, thank goodness. But that scene that you just brought up, though, with Maria and Jesus is so stressful because we are with Dalworth and Rico hiding, and it feels like we're about to witness a rape, right? Because like
Yes.
Jesus walks in, he starts taking off his belt, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh no, this is we're gonna. And like I'm like, are they gonna let him do the bad thing? And then it's like, oh wait, no, Maria is in love with him. Like, and there, of course, even then you have like, is this a Florence Nightingale? And that's not the right one. What's the one where like you fall in love with your captor?
Oh,
I
the
can't.
Stockholm syndrome thing.
Stockholm syndrome. It's Stockholm syndrome. That's what it's called. It's
Yep.
exactly it. A good movie called Stockholm with Ethan Hawke about the actual reason that thing is called that. But
Yes.
uh, uh,
Good old Ethan Hawke.
always. Um, so you're still like hesitant. Like, is this Stockholm syndrome? Is because she's been
Mhm.
captured? Is she just does she feel like she has to? And then the reveal that like when you get her whole backstory and that this her, if anything, her current husband bought her, and it's that again that juxtaposition of where we think we think this guy with the capitalist is the the hero, he's the guy with the money, his wife was taken, he's going to pay anything he can to get her back. But he's he's not that. She is nothing more than land that has been taken from him according to him,
Yeah.
but the land's being taken from people who actually live there that he just claimed it. It's and that's a common theme in westerns is like land disputes. Like that's one of the big things about Shane. It's in this case though, it's now done with a person that's representing more than just that though. It's a I think it's unfair to say this plot is narrow. Like I think on its surface, yes, it's a very straightforward fetch quest. My wife's been kidnapped. She's over there. Go get her.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of layers to that. It's not that simple because that's the whole point, right? Like honestly, now I'm mad at that critic. I feel like that's super dismissive because again,
it
the general
is
setup
harsh.
is there, but when you really think about what the film is doing, especially Lancaster's character is complex because he's in jail for sleeping with someone's wife, if I'm not mistaken, or
Yes.
like and they bail him out, and so he's kind of has a hard time. There's a lot of jokes about him being in his underwear and things like that, and
He's
uh
in his underwear a lot.
He is, because he makes questionable choices. That's the thing. These guys are anti-heroes, right? Like that's how they're
They are.
depicted. They all have done something. They've been a part of something. They've been on the wrong side of things, and they've also been on the right side of things. And it does seem like their intentions are good, versus where Alfie, like you're like, his intentions are selfish. These guys don't seem selfish, and that's one of the things Maria brings up about Bill is like, you fought with Jesus. There's no way, and he's like, yes, but now I am hired by this guy, and I'm not just going to let you go. But he's
Yep.
clearly not the person he acts like he is at first. Um, I don't know. I've the two times I've watched this now, I really find it an interesting thought experiment. Like it's not on the surface. There's a lot to dissect and think about their
Yep.
characters. There's some problematic things. Woody Strode is Jake Sharp. We mentioned Jake. The it's set in the old west, so there's some racism thrown in, of course, and by the quote unquote hero guy that's hired the team. He's like, I hope you don't mind working with this type of person who's he says he doesn't say the worst word, but he says a word I'm still not going to say, in reference to Woody Strode, and the guy kind of just, to be fair, I think Rico's character kind of like looks at him like, why would you ask me that? Like,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
not a thing. Um, but yeah, so you still have those things, and then again, I like Jack Palance. I think Jack Palance is. I didn't recognize that was him, having seen him in many things at this point, because I'm like, well, it can't be Jack Palance there, because
Which
that's
one is
that's
he? Yeah.
yeah, it can't be that guy. But yeah, I really enjoyed this film. I'm not like, I know Lee Marvin as a name, but like I haven't seen a lot of stuff with him in it. But I really like him here. You see him as kind of like a archetype of other actors in Hollywood throughout the years. He's rough and tough, but also like noble to the degree, which is it's an archetype within the Western too. But like
Yeah.
there's something about him that I enjoyed, and I also don't feel like I'm super familiar with Burt Lancaster, but I really liked him in this. Where like I'm now, if we go to watch something else and he's in it, I'll be like, oh cool, I'm in, because I really liked him in this. He's the type of character when you write him into a story, I'm often going to click with, because he seems to be the most broken of the group, and yet he's the one that they keep constantly having to lean on to survive. If he's not there,
Yeah.
most of the time things don't work out in their favor. So yeah.
Yeah. No, it's another film in the Western genre which I watched and was pleasantly surprised at. I just think when I go into them, I don't know what it is. I just expect kind of like long sweeping shots of dusty, sandy vistas and not an awful lot going on, and people just staring and
See, I
tense standoffs.
I think what you're thinking of, based on very little actual watching on my end, is the John Ford Western, which is that. And that's why, like,
Exactly that. Yeah.
yes, The Searchers is a beloved film. Scorsese, the whole movie Brats bunch cite The Searchers as one of the films that like
Yeah. Yeah.
inspired them. I think even the Fablemans, John Ford is referenced as
Very much
Spielberg's,
so.
like,
Yeah.
David Lynch
Yeah.
is John Ford. Um, I think The
Yeah.
Searchers is terrible. I do not get what,
Very
like, I
long.
mean, there's beautiful shots, and yeah, but I had like zero connection to that film. I don't like John Wayne's character, which again, my readings of after, because a lot of times if I don't like something, I seek to figure out why other people do. Like, why is this a
Yep.
lauded film? If I watch it and I'm like, devastated. Same thing when I watch like Phantasm, or the Dario Argento film Suspiria, that I don't like his version of. I don't like Lupe's version much better, but I actually understood that version. Didn't understand anything that happened in Suspiria, but it's a beloved film, and I struggle. And uh, the Searchers for me is that one, because again, I went into the Searchers having already decided, oh, I actually like Western, so here's this iconic Western I'm going to love,
Yeah.
and it did not click for me. And
Yeah.
I think it's because of what you described. I'm definitely more in the vein of this kind. I still haven't watched the
Yep.
original Mag 7, but I've seen Seven Samurai, and I've seen the Antoine Fuqua Mag 7, which is,
Mm,
it has good moments, and
mm.
then it's not so good.
And then
But there's some good
it's not
moments.
so good. But no, you're spot on. It is those John Ford. And look, John Ford is one of the legendary directors and most decorated directors in Hollywood history. and for good reason too. But at the same time, it doesn't mean you have to. Well, personally speaking, it doesn't mean I have to fawn over everything the guy does. Um, but yeah, that's my impression of westerns, and then I see other westerns out there, big westerns as well. Well, some of the Clint Eastwood films too, and like you say, kind of like western adjacent neo western films of recent years. I'm like, yeah, this is really cool. As long as they have something to say, which is key. I think they've got to have something to say. They've got to have something bubbling away there. Because if it is just like wolf and child syndrome, or like this, go and pick up a person who's been captured, bring them back. It can be good, but it's what's in between those cracks, and it works for me in some of these films. And Western genre is one where I still have it at arm's length a little bit. I think I just need to get over the fact that, like you said, not everything is those very sort of long, drawn out, methodical, pensive style. And if they are, they can still be great. But something like this, it does move at a pace. Like you say, when they get Maria back, it does move at a pace. It's so much so that there's a scene where they have to escape on a train, and Raza's gang and that they're in quick pursuit, and then suddenly they're not on the train. They've disappeared somehow, and they just move on with the film. I was like, how did they get away? They don't even show how they got away. And there's also a shot of Raza just like executing the captured soldiers, which I thought was didn't expect that to be. I wasn't expecting that. So there was a little bit of true grit to this film, which
Yeah.
I quite enjoyed. But like
Uh,
some of the lines, I think are great. The one when Jack Palance, as Jesus Raza says at the end of his monologue, he says, "We stay because we believe." Talking about the revolution, he says, "Sorry, without love, without a cause, we are nothing. We stay because we leave. We leave because we are disillusioned. We come back because we are lost, and we die because we are committed." Really, really, really well said. And his back and forward in that scene is so well done. And to hear things like they're not, the lines aren't great throughout. I think you see there are some which are a bit odd, like when they're watching Maria and realise, hold on, she's actually on board with Raza, and they're going to get it on in this scene. Like he says, I think it's Burt Lancaster says, "Amigo, we've been had. Let's get the hell out of here." It's not award-winning dialogue, but it's sometimes it's a delivery. It's how can you sell these lines? And there are so many
yeah.
films out there which have great actors in who can't sell good lines, or you've got actors who are able to sell bad lines, which then elevate what's going on. So a lot of what's said is fairly rudimentary or kind of Western or sort of hero speak, but I think it's sold well, man. I think it's
But
sold
yeah,
well.
it's delivered really well because like that line, I agree. It's on paper, it's not that impressive, but he says it. You're like, oh, let's get out of here. He's right.
Yeah.
We've been tricked, man. Like this, this,
Yep.
this girl's here on her own accord. Um, you mentioned the shocking violence. This also apparently is the first Western to feature nudity, although it is at a long shot. But it's still post Hays Code, so we're starting to see filmmakers push the boundaries of what our audience is willing to accept, and I think that is probably one of those moments. Although if you go pre Hays Code, there's some pretty crazy stuff on camera, but post Hays Code, what was allowed to be shown on camera, obviously. I think the greatest thing that happened to Hitchcock was the Hays Code because I think Frenzy proves
Yeah.
when he's if he had free reign the whole time, like I don't
Mhm.
think we would have got the nuance that we got because he had to
I
figure out how to
totally
dance
agree.
around it. And so but in other cases, it does open up to, some filmmakers to explore the areas that maybe benefit the film. And like Roz is not painted as a good guy, but he's also not a villain. And they
Yeah.
they are talking about that, the idea of revolutionaries. It's only you're only the villain if you're on the. I think I don't remember if it was this movie or not. There's something I saw recently where they were talking about like terrorists, and it's like you're a terrorist to some, but you're a rebellion leader or you're a rebel to others.
Mhm.
Depending on that perspective, and it's easy to forget that if you feel oppressed and someone on your side of that oppression starts fighting back, you look at them as a hero, not as the villain, and that is the kind of the central debate of this film, which again I do feel like that review, man, it's also interesting to point out because 75 Metacritic uh could also be modern reviews looking back at the film. This
Yeah.
is an original review of that era, so
Yes.
I'm curious, was the general consensus of the era that this was a
That's a good point.
crappy Western, or if this was one guy who didn't like it, maybe didn't like Westerns. I mean, right now, if you were to start pulling reviews of Marvel movies, you're going to see a lot more negative reviews right now than 10 years ago, because I think we're all burnt out and tired of it. In 66, Westerns are done. Like, we've
Yeah,
literally,
that's a
the
good shout.
phase of the Western being the predominant genre has faded, and Westerns are white noise for the most part at this point in
Mhm.
66. And
It's crazy
they,
how many westerns there were pre that, like
so many.
everywhere. Yeah,
Yeah.
everywhere, man.
I mean, well, I mean,
Crazy.
name an actor from the 40s or 50s, and there is a Western with them in it. Even like the ones that always throw me is like James Stewart. I'm like, James Stewart was a cowboy?
Yeah,
Like, where? Because that's every movie I know, he does not make sense as a cowboy. I still have not watched, I think I've seen one of his Westerns. And he wasn't the star in the Western that I saw. I can't remember what it was, but I think it's the one with him and Wayne, where like he's like the back character. But yeah, but like every actor
names
worth
go
their
over my
salt
head.
got tossed, yeah, got tossed into a Western because it was the genre. Just like now, I mean, we're constantly like, oh my god, so and so is doing a superhero movie. It's like they're all going to do a
Yeah,
superhero movie because every studio is going to make a bajillion superhero movies right now, and
yeah, and
until we're
there's
all
money
burnt
to be
out.
made for the actors as well. If you can get, I
Yeah,
imagine back in the day, if you can get steady work in Western films, you're doing quite well for yourself. And it's the same now for well, the studios need to pay their actors more, or at all. But it is similar. It's just that steady stream of work. It's funny how we've, to me, westerns are at their core quintessentially American. I know they borrow from so many other genres and
oh
so many
yeah,
other countries, but whereas obviously in Alfie it's like quintessentially British. So we're opening up with
interesting.
such a British film, and for me, such an American. So it just stinks of Americana, like the Western. It is just like that whole vibe, and it's a really interesting kind of trade off there. But no, I did like The Professionals. It's another Western which I'm going to add to my list of, colour me surprised. I didn't dislike it. Thought it's pretty good, and I like the team up. I think the guys all work well together. I think Maria, I think Claudia Cardinale, she's such a great screen presence. She's so gorgeous in this film, and it's I love how she's used in it. And at the end, when they all bandy together and send them back off to, we said we'd get her home, we're gonna get her home, and then send her back home, and they do the right thing in the end. And
Yeah.
so we get one film which, like you said, doesn't quite end maybe as satisfying as you want in terms of the antagonist or the lead, sorry, getting what they deserve or maybe having an epiphany. Whereas here, you kind of get that a little bit more with The Professionals, I think.
I agree. I think it's just a solid film, and um, yeah, if you like the genre or if you don't like the genre, I think this is one that, like you said, it's under 2 hours and it moves pretty steadily. So it's not one that's going to drag, and
Yeah.
it's not a quiet contemplative Western like some are, and I like
No,
those. Sometimes, not always, but this one is
it's
definitely
in the
more of
mood.
a shootout kind of out in the West, like out in the middle of nowhere at times. So yeah, it's worth checking out if you haven't already seen it. Um, well, folks, that's it for this episode. We've covered two movies from 1966, number 10 and number 9. On our next episode, in about a month, we're going to be covering number 8 and number 7. And those films are respectively Grand Prix and The Russians Are Coming. The Russians Are Coming. That
No,
title feels not great right now,
no,
oddly.
no.
But yeah, but that's what our next episode. So seek those films out. Just a little spoiler for that episode. Grand Prix was one that I had no knowledge of when we started 1966, and kind of blew me away. I was really impressed with it, and it might have ruined other racing movies that maybe came out this year featuring a video game.
Yeah, yeah, that stunk. Yeah, man, I'm looking. Yeah, the Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. What a bad title, anyway. But
Yeah,
it's the era, isn't it, with these odd titles? But yeah, looking forward to covering those two, my friend. I think we've had a pretty good start of the two films this month, though.
yeah, and that's the thing is about the way we do this show, listener, is just because they're top 10 in box office, one, doesn't mean they're going to hold up in terms of our eyes. Two, doesn't make them good movies. That
Yeah,
we have lived in an era where the highest
mm.
grossing films are not good.
Or
Um,
Transformers films.
yeah, but they made money, and so these top 10 lists can be up and down, and you're going to see that we started with a relatively positive review episode for our first
Agreed.
episode, which is 10 and 9. Will that hold up when we get to number 1 and 2? that'll be the quick kind of interesting question.
And
We'll
we'll
see.
only ever be honest, won't we, JB? We'll always only ever
We
be
are
honest
always
because
honest.
we are film critics. We pride ourselves on being able to, on journalistic integrity and just being honest. Even if the world hates a film, The Exorcist Believer, and one person likes it, we'll always ever be honest. JB hated it, but so if
I did.
there might be a year where we hate every film in the top 10, or we absolutely love each film, but
I
that's
hope
just the way
that
it
never
goes.
happens. Yeah, it definitely could happen. I mean, it's a slow going because we're doing these in 6-part episodes, and we're on 1966 for the next 6 months before we get to our next year. But you know, it's still we don't know until we get to that year. We're not actively looking at like we have our map of where we've got this show
Yeah.
planned out till we're dead, folks. So
We literally have.
so um, we may get to a year. We're not looking at what movies are in that top 10 for like
That's right.
10 years from now. We're only looking at the very next one. So who knows? Like you said, but it's the fun part of this whole process. And you can be a part of this process if you want to follow us on social media. You can interact with us, talk to us, tell us what you thought about this year. Did we miss anything in our honorable mentions for 1966? Because if
Yeah.
there's a movie that's worth our time, that's what this is. We're ultimately just trying to see all the movies. That's my goal.
Yes.
They keep making more, so it's getting hard. But
Damn
I
them.
hope they keep making more. I'm very afraid they're not. But you can follow us on social media. So just go to Instagram, Twitter, whatever, and search Movie Astrology. And also while you're there, look up Bloody Awesome Movie Podcast or Bloody Awesome Movie Pod or BAMP_podcast, and follow us there too because there's different ways to interact with us. But yeah, we want to hear from you. We want to know your thoughts about the show. What do you think about the new format? Anything you missed? Anything we should be doing? We want to hear from you, right, Matt?
Yeah, let us know what you thought about the show. I'm enjoying doing it in this format because we do get to chat 15
Yeah,
minutes or so about each film and sort of a bit of back and forward. And it is different from reviewing the latest film out there because some of the films we will talk about in future we would have lived with and loved or
or
not
seen
loved
a
for
hundred
years
thousand times.
or
Yeah, like
seen so many times, and it's going to be so. But we don't always have the forum with which to talk about it. So yeah, I'm digging doing this. We'd love to know what you thought. If you've seen Alfie, if you've seen The Professionals, or if you haven't, does the idea of like a really East End British film or a Western put you off? Or have we managed to sell it to you? Let us know. Let us know in the comments below, or just send us a message, like JB said, Movie Astrology, Twitter, and Instagram.
And folks, that's all we have for this week's episode. Again, we'll be back with Grand Prix and The Russians Are Coming. The Russians Are Coming. We're not going to tell you where you can watch those just yet because streaming services change so frequently. So depending on when you listen to this, could vary where you can find them. I think I bought most of these digitally though, so like that's an option. You can always go VOD, but they're probably on some service somewhere. Every once
Or
in a while, we
second
will.
hand, or you can rent them. Yeah.
Yeah, the older we go, the harder the movies are to find. But 66 to 80s, most of the stuff is somewhere, at least
Yes.
the top 10 stuff. So folks, thank you again. We'll be back in a month with our next episode. In the meantime, keep watching movies.
See ya.